All right. So we're back. Hold on. Okay, so we're back to the normal Wheel of Fate. The other one was just too awkward, too in the way. So I'm gonna try something to see if I can change the look of the camera so you'll be able to see when I spin exactly what it wheels on. I know that this actually does spin so much better than the other one. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to go down here. Yeah, guys, it doesn't show me what y'all were showing me today. I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. You should still be able to see it. It's a little loose, but that's okay. We'll deal with it. That's a little bit better. Okay, so this is the Wheel of Fate. There is a category for every story, okay? We have possession, urban legend, Stephen King, short story, cryptid, paranormal, true crime, horror movie, Appalachian horror, and aliens and possession. I probably said possession twice. All right, so here we go. What do you want to see? Let's do a test run, shall we? Urban legend. Okay, so that's just a test run. We're gonna do it again. I see a lot of true crime, aliens. All right, here we go. This is it. First story. Can you read that? I couldn't believe when it landed on that. Oh my God, I have had a true crime story waiting in the wings for months. Months. I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm so excited. I don't know where my chair is. Oh, okay. Here we go. This is exciting. This is a true crime case that I had never heard before. One of the Night Dwellers actually suggested it to me, and I was shocked that I had never heard this one. It is a doozy. But before we go into it, we have to go into story time, don't we? Welcome to Twisted Tales Live. I am your host, Bryn Morgan. I am also a horror author. And tonight, the first story that the Wheel of Fate has chosen is true crime. We'll get into that title here in a minute. This is the Night Room. I am the Night Queen. And it's time for a story. Do you like scary stories? Oh, you do? Then you've came to the right place. Lower your lights. Lock your doors. Light a candle to chase those shadows away. Pull your curtains nice and tight. Wrap yourself in your warmest blanket to avoid the chills that are about to crawl up your spine. And let's begin. Good evening, Night Dwellers. Tonight's story is a heavy one. It is rooted in truth, in horror, and in tragedy. We ask that you prepare yourselves for an unsettling descent into the darkest corridors of the human mind. This is not fiction. This is not folklore. This is a true crime that shattered a family, a community, and left behind questions that no one can answer. What you're about to hear is the story of the Doman killings, 2023, Monroe Township, Ohio. Get ready. This one makes no sense. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before. It was a bright summer afternoon in Clermont County, Ohio, June the 15th, 2023. A Thursday like any other. Ordinary to those driving through winding back roads. Children playing in their yards. The scent of freshly cut grass hanging in the air. I love that smell. From the outside, The Dorman family home looked like any other modest property, tucked away in Monroe Township. A red brick house, a simple yard, toys scattered about from afternoons of play, Hot Wheels, balls. Inside that home lived Chad Dorman, his wife Laura, and their 3 little boys, Clayton, who was 7, Hunter, who was 4, and Chase, who was 3, and Laura's daughter Alexis from a previous relationship. To the casual neighbor, the family seemed unremarkable, blending into the rhythm of small-town life. The boys were bright and full of energy, always chasing one another through the yard with sticks or throwing a football or a soccer ball. They would be seen walking to the boat with fishing poles, and sometimes their dad would go out with them in go-karts, their laughter echoing down the street. But behind the closed doors of the house, something darker had been stirring. Chad Dorman was not a man who wore his demons openly. He was quiet, almost withdrawn at times. Neighbors described him as someone who kept to himself. Yet in the weeks leading up to that June day, court documents would later reveal that he had been extremely restless, from what family members told them. Unable to sleep, plagued by thoughts that no one else could have ever imagined. Scary thoughts. He had been planning, calculating, and harboring a darkness that no one around him knew about. No one could sense, or perhaps no one wanted to believe was even possible. That afternoon at 4:15 p.m., a call would later be made to 911. But before that call, before the sirens would wail through Monroe Township, there was a stillness in the Dorman home. Laura had returned home, tending to the boys, and her stepdaughter stood nearby. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing at all. The family dog barked in the yard. The house, though modest, carried the weight of everyday life. Laundry folded halfway. Dishes drying on the counter. A clutter of toys in the living room. And then Chad's voice cut through the normalcy. Calm, direct, chilling in hindsight. He told his whole family, "Come to the bedroom." His boys, all 3 of them, still filled with the innocence of children, followed. Why? Because Daddy was calling to them. Laura and Alexis followed too. Confusion tracing their steps. The master bedroom smelled faintly of detergent and Laura's perfume. The curtains were half drawn, letting in streaks of sunlight that cut across the bedspread. Chad stood near the closet, his face completely unreadable. Lie down, he instructed his family. At first, Laura thought he was joking. I imagine I would have too. The boys giggled nervously, not understanding the weight of their father's tone. But something in his eyes silenced her question before it formed. The laughter faded. Hunter looked to his mother, confusion in his wide, innocent gaze. The moment hung in the air, like static. Chad turned to the weapon safe in his closet. With deliberate slowness, he retrieved a weapon. The metal glinted under the pale light. Laura's breath caught in her throat. Chad, what are you doing? No answer. They watched as he loaded his weapon. The boys shifted uncomfortably on the bed, their small bodies pressing close to one another, sensing danger, but unable to grasp its enormity. Alexa's heart pounded in her chest. She would later remember the feeling of pure dread. An instinct screaming at her with everything in her to run at that moment. What followed in the next few minutes would leave an uneraseable scar on Ohio's history. But in that frozen moment, everything was still. The air itself seemed to wait. And outside, the world remained oblivious. The sky still blue. The grass still green. Neighbors still tending their yards. No one knew that inside that quiet house, tragedy had already begun its march. Night dwellers, imagine being in that bedroom at this very moment. Would you have sensed that something was wrong before the weapon appeared? Or would you, like Laura, have been caught in stunned silence? Chapter 2. The first shot. The silence in the master bedroom stretched long enough to sting the ears. Laura's pulse thundered in her chest. She wanted to scream, to lunge forward, to grab the weapon from Chad's hands, but something in his stillness froze her. His face was blank, a mask that was devoid of any emotion. The boys shifted nervously on the bed. Clayton reached for Hunter's hand, their tiny fingers lacing together. Can you imagine that? Two little boys, wondering what Daddy is doing with the weapon in his hand. Chase pressed himself to his mother's side. He was 3. Not fully understanding, only sensing the wrongness in the air. Chad spoke again, his voice low. Stay still. And then the weapon sounded. The sound shattered the quiet, split in the air like lightning. A deafening metallic thunder in that small room. The muzzle flashed, the scent of gunpowder instantly coating the air, sharp and acrid, filling lungs with its poison. The first weapon struck Hunter first, 4 years old. The middle boy. His body jerked violently as the weapon tore into him. For a heartbeat, silence followed. No one moved, no one breathed. And then Laura screamed. A sound so raw and primal it seemed to rip from her very soul. She screamed out, "No, Chad, stop." She lunged forward, but Chad leveled the weapon again. Alexis bolted out of the room. Instinct screamed louder than fear. She grabbed Clayton's hand, the oldest, pulling him off the bed, desperate to escape. The world blurred as her legs pumped toward the door. She told Clayton to run. Run fast! Her voice breaking, tears streaking her face. Clayton stumbled beside her, his small feet barely keeping pace. The hallway felt endless, and behind them Laura's shrieks collided with another shot. Deafening. Brutal. Chad was moving, deliberate, his boots pounding the carpeted floor, chasing his fleeing son that was with Alexis. Her hand slipped and Clayton's small frame slipped free as panic overtook him. He bolted toward the back door, his desperate cries cutting through the chaos. "Daddy, no." Those words, neighbors would later recall hearing. The desperate, pleading voice of a child telling his father not to hurt him. Words that would haunt those who heard them for years to come. Clayton ran into the yard, legs pumping, his heart racing faster than it ever had before. He cut across the grass toward the field that bordered their home. Freedom seemed just steps away. But behind him, his father pursued. With cold determination, his weapon raised. Clayton right in his sights. The summer air buzzed with insects, bird songs silenced by the thunder of weapon fire. The boy fell. The shot caught him, his small body crumpling into the tall green grass. Inside, Laura had thrown herself at Chad, clawing, screaming, her nails tearing at his arms. The weapon roared again, its kickback driving him forward. She felt the searing pain of it tearing into her flesh. Stumbling, she gasped as blood bloomed warm across her skin. "Please," she sobbed, her voice hoarse. "Please stop, Chad. They're just babies." But Chad was beyond hearing. that day. Little Chase, only 3 years old, was still in the room, his cries piercing. He had no word, only the primal wail of a child in terror. His mother tried to shield him, her body pressed over his. But Chad walked over to the bed. His shadow loomed. He pried at her arms. His voice was flat, mechanical. And he ordered her to give him to me. She screamed again. He wrenched Chase from his grasp, lifting the boy by the arm as he squirmed, kicking desperately, his small fists flailing. Laura's voice was shredded, desperate, but powerless. The weapon rose once more. And in that moment, all of Monroe Township seemed to still. Neighbors across the street looked up, some hearing screams, some hearing the crack of the weapon. The first 911 call rang through at 4:11 p.m. A woman sobbing, panicked, incoherent. But inside that house, in those few minutes, a family was being annihilated. By the time that the police were dispatched, the Dorman yard was littered with horror. 3 small lives extinguished. And Chad Dorman, their father, stood outside on the front stoop, waiting calmly. The weapon resting beside him, propped against its leg, as though nothing in the world had changed, as though he had not just unalived his sons. If you were the neighbor who heard the first shots and screams, would you have run toward the house, frozen in fear, unable to move? We say we would do something in that moment, but what would you do? Chapter 3, when the sirens came. The first 911 call was chaotic. A woman's broken voice, the sounds of sobs and shouts behind her. Words tumbled out in fragments. My husband, he's shooting. The children. Please, God, please. The dispatcher tried to steady her as best as she could, but panic had already bled through the line. Within minutes, the rural calm of Monroe Township shattered. Sirens pierced the late afternoon air, rising and falling in frantic waves. Neighbors stepped from their porches, shielding their eyes against the sun. What in the world had happened in their neighborhood? Watching as patrol cars tore down the narrow road, lights flashing blue and red against the siding of quiet homes. And when they arrived at the Dorman residence, everything was still. Chad Dorman sat on the front step, the weapon lying beside him, now on the concrete. His posture was unnervingly casual, like a man waiting for a ride at a bus stop. His hands resting loosely on his knees. The world outside seemed untouched by the slaughter inside. Birds still sang, the sun still shined. The flag on the porch gently stirred in the summer breeze, but the ground was stained. And the air was heavy with the metallic tang of discharge and blood. Officers emerged from their cruisers with their weapons drawn, their voices cutting the silence. Put your hands up where we can see them. Chad didn't fight. He didn't resist. He rose slowly, hands lifting without any argument, his face blank. One officer would later recall how calm that he seemed, as though the enormity of what he had just done, taking the lives of his 3 boys, did not exist within him. Behind the house, through the tall grass of the field, the scene was unthinkable. Clayton's small body lay sprawled, lifeless in the dirt. His clothes, who had just minutes before been bright with play, were now soaked in crimson. The officers' radios crackled with urgent codes as one after another confirmed all 3 children were unalived. Inside, Laura lay bleeding, her body trembling as she clutched her wounds, her cries breaking the air. She kept calling out for the boys' names, her voice raw and desperate. Clayton, Hunter, Chase. Alexis hovered over her, tears streaking down her face, begging her mother to hold on. The officers rushed in, pulling Laura towards safety, guiding Alexis out of the carnage. The sight of Chase's small frame crumbled on the bedroom floor stopped one paramedic cold. He didn't understand how not just someone, but the boy's own father had unalived him at 3 years old. His hands trembled as he reached down, but he knew immediately that there was nothing to save. The house smelled of gunpowder, blood, and the faint traces of family's ordinary life. A pan with bacon in it, where Laura had fixed breakfast earlier. A cup of orange juice on the counter that Chase had been drinking when Daddy called, "Come in the bedroom." Cartoons still playing on the TV, on the Disney Channel. Laundry soap. Toys lay scattered near the driveway. Silent now, symbols of a life that would never return. Neighbors gathered at the edges of their yards, hands pressed to their mouths. Their faces pale, they whispered in disbelief. These were the boys who rode their go-karts up and down the street, who carried fishing poles to the creek, who waved when school buses passed, who went door to door selling candy bars. Now their names would be spoken in hushed grief. Their lives defined by what their father had done. As officers led Chad Dorman to a patrol car, his neighbors stared. Some shouted, "You freaking monster." One woman wept openly, clutching her child to her chest. Chad's eyes remained forward, his face expressionless, his steps steady. He was taken into custody without a struggle. The weapon, the spent shells, the bodies of his sons, all of it remained behind as evidence of the unspeakable. At 4:27, the nightmare was over, but its echoes were only beginning. The yard had once been filled with children's laughter was now a crime scene with yellow tape. The yellow tape unfurled across the driveway, investigators moving methodically, marking bullet casings, photographing every detail. and Laura, bleeding, shattered, was taken by ambulance to the hospital, her cries for her boys trailing into the humid air. Can you imagine? The story had only begun to unfold. But for those who stood on Monroe Township's soil that evening, life would never again feel ordinary. Night dwellers, imagine seeing your neighbor, someone that you have waved at for years, led away in handcuffs after committing the unthinkable. Would you scream at him in rage? Or would you stand frozen, unable to speak? Chapter 4, The Confession. At the sheriff's office, Chad Dorman sat in a stark interrogation room. The walls were plain, painted in muted gray, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above. A camera blinked steadily from the corner, recording every twitch of his face, every flicker of movement. The air was thick, charged with absolute disbelief. The deputies who escorted him in could barely look at him without their stomachs turning. Fathers themselves, they struggled to reconcile the man before them with the horror described over the radio. Chad's demeanor was chilling. He did not thrash. He did not shout. He did not cry. He calmly just sat. His hands folded, his face blank. To the officers, in fact, one of the officers said, it was as if he had emptied himself of humanity. When investigators asked the inevitable question, Chad, why? His voice was quiet, almost detached, and he looked at them and he said, I've been planning this. The words landed like stones in the room. Planning. Not a moment of madness, planning it out. Not a sudden rage, but premeditation. But why? Detectives pressed. How long? He looked at them. What do you mean? Chad looked down at his hands and then up again, his eyes lifeless. Months. Months, he admitted. Had you planned on just your boys? No. No, I had planned on all of them. He described nights when he couldn't sleep, lying awake with thoughts swirling in his mind. He admitted to reading the Bible to his children in the days before, telling them that they were the best boys ever. A cruel echo now, a father praising them before unaliving them. One detective leaned forward, trying to crack through the coldness. Chad, do you understand what you have done? They trusted you. They were your boys. Why would you do this? Chad only shrugged. It had to be done. That phrase would ripple through the courtroom months later. It had to be done. No one could comprehend its meaning. No logic could fit the weight of those words. It had to be done. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Laura's body was stitched and stabilized, but her heart was beyond repair. She kept calling for her boys, begging the nurses for news on her boys. When the truth was spoken that all three of them were gone, they said that she wailed with such agony as they had never heard a woman cry before. The seasoned nurses had to leave the room because they were crying. Alexis, the stepdaughter, sat in silence nearby. She was the only one that managed to escape unscathed. I'm so glad that she listened to her inner voice that told her to run. Her mind replayed every second, her grip on Clayton's hand, the sound of gunfire behind her, her mother's screams. Survivor's guilt began, though, to work cruelly into her young mind. She had lived. They had not. Back at the station, Chad's confession continued, though it was small and it was in fragments. He spoke of the weapon, of luring his family into the bedroom. He admitted to unaliving Hunter first, and then chasing Clayton into the field, and then prying 3-year-old Chase from his mother's arms. Each word was devoid of remorse, each sentence a blade, a slicing through the investigators who listened. And then, in a moment that would later become crucial in the trial, Chad asked for a lawyer. He said he wasn't going to say anymore. The detectives hesitated, though, then pressed forward, continuing the questioning. They wanted answers, they wanted clarity, and they wanted it now. But by law, the moment that he asked for counsel, the line should have gone silent. Everyone knows that. But it did not. They kept pressing him. The mistake would come to haunt the prosecution later. When a judge ruled Chad's confession inadmissible. That's right. Everything he said, everything he confessed to, everything that he admitted to went down the garbage when the detectives did not do what they were supposed to do. What do you think about that? But on that night, in that room, investigators heard the hollow voice of a man describing the execution of his sons as though he were recounting the weather. The news spread across Claremont County like wildfire. Local outlets interrupted broadcasts with breaking alerts. 3 children unalived by their father in Monroe Township. Families stopped in their tracks, clutching their own children tighter. Vigils began almost instantly. Neighbors leaving flowers, stuffed animals, and candles at the end of the Dorman driveway. The community was united in grief. They could not reconcile the man they had seen mowing his lawn just the day before waving politely, living quietly with the monster that was being described on the local evening news. And still, Chad Dorman sat in his cell, calm, silent, and waiting. Night dwellers. If you were in that interrogation room hearing a father calmly confess to killing his own children, would you have been able to stay professional with him? Or would rage have overtaken you? Knowing my temper, probably the latter. Chapter 5, The Indictment. The days after the unalivings were a blur of grief, outrage, and questions that seemed to have no answers. News vans lined the streets of Monroe Township, their satellite dishes rising against the quiet Ohio sky. The Dorman family that was once ordinary was now swarmed with investigators, forensic teams, and reporters. Yellow tape fluttered in the summer breeze like a scar across the yard. In the county courthouse, prosecutors worked quickly. What Chad Dorman had done was not only unspeakable, but it was deliberate, methodical. The grand jury wasted no time returning a 21-count indictment. 9 counts of aggravated unaliving, 8 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of felonious assault. Every charge carried weight, but the aggravated murder counts carried the heaviest. With them came the possibility of the death penalty. At his arraignment, Chad appeared in shackles, orange gel attire hanging loose on his frame. The courtroom was packed, reporters scribbling notes, local families sitting in hushed disbelief, officers lining the walls. Laura was not there. She was still recovering physically, though nothing could heal what had been torn from her. The judge read the charges aloud. Each word rang out like a tolling bell. With every count, Chad's face remained blank, his expression unchanged. No flicker of remorse, no glimmer of sorrow, just emptiness. The prosecutor's voice was steady, but beneath it pulsed the fury of a man who had seen too much carnage in his career. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not a crime of passion. This was not a momentary lapse of reason. This was pure out-and-out execution, he told the court. Reporters scribbled down every word. Outside, the community gathered, holding candles and stuffed animals in memory of their 3 little boys, Clayton, Hunter, and Chase. Neighbors wept openly, their grief spilling into embraces on the courthouse steps. Children held on to their parents, not fully understanding, only sensing the darkness in the air. One local woman said through tears, "They were the sweetest boys. They played with my boys, always smiling, always playing in the yard. I just can't believe he did this." The indictment was only the beginning. The legal machine had begun to move, and every gear of it was aimed at ensuring Chad Dorman would never walk free again. Yet beneath the layers of legal jargon and courtroom formality, there was the unshakable reality. No matter the verdict, no matter the sentence, 3 young lives were gone, snuffed out like a flame. No law, no punishment could bring them back. Still, the community demanded justice. The prosecutor vowed to pursue it with every measure that the law allowed. He spoke of seeking death, the ultimate penalty, reserved for crimes that shattered the consciousness of society. And in the days that followed, while Chad sat in his cell, staring at blank walls, his charges multiplying, Laura wrote her first public statement. Her words were heavy, grief-soaked, but clear. No punishment will ever bring my boys back, but I will fight with everything in me to make sure he can never hurt another soul again. The indictment marked the line between what had been lost and what would now unfold. A trial that would expose the darkest corners of a father's mind. Night dwellers, do you believe that in cases like this, where the case is and the crime is absolutely beyond comprehension, that the death penalty should be on the table? Or is life in prison the harsher fate? Let me know in the comments. Chapter 6, Broken Words. By autumn of 2023, Clermont County had become the unwilling stage for one of the darkest trials in Ohio's history. The courthouse brimmed with grief-stricken neighbors, reporters, and onlookers, desperate to understand how a father could annihilate his own blood, his sons. And as I've said before, it's not just his sons that he annihilated. He annihilated generations, grandsons, great-grandsons, great-great-grandsons. He annihilated generations with the unaliving of his sons. Marriages, graduations, births. So sad. The prosecution's case appeared at first unshakable. They had the weapon. They had eyewitness testimony from Laura and Alexis. They had neighbors who plainly heard the screams, the shots, the desperate cries of, "Daddy, no." They had Chad Dorman's own confession captured on video where he admitted planning the unalivings for months. But then came the blow. In March of 2024, the defense filed a motion. They argued that Chad's constitutional rights had been violated during questioning. He had asked for a lawyer, and detectives had continued pressing him. In any other case, perhaps the error would have been small and overlooked, but in the case of this magnitude, every letter of the law mattered. The judge listened. He weighed the evidence and finally struck the gavel with a ruling that reverberated through this date. Chad Dorman's confession was inadmissible. Gasp filled the courtroom. Reporters' pens flew across their notepads. For Laura, who sat trembling in the gallery, it was another weapon twisting into the wound. She had heard him admit it. She had lived it, and now the court said those words could not be heard by the jury. The prosecution was undeterred, though. They still had the physical evidence, the eyewitnesses, the timeline. But losing the confession meant losing the most chilling piece of the puzzle, Chad admitting to it. Chad's calm acknowledgement that his horror had been deliberate, premeditated, and inevitable in his mind. It was going to happen. He was going to do it. In the jail, Chad remained silent. He read the news clippings, watched the proceedings from afar, and spoke very little. His fellow inmates kept their distance, even among criminals. The unaliving of children drew a line that no one dared cross. His meals were delivered with cold glares. His name was whispered with disgust in the hallways of the jail. Meanwhile, Laura tried to piece her life together in fragments. Her nights were sleepless, haunted by screams that replayed endlessly in her mind. She held her son's toys at night, pressing their small shirts to her face, searching for any trace of their scent that was left behind. The community pressed forward with vigils, each one a reminder that the boys were gone, but they were not forgotten. Photos of Clayton, Hunter, and Chase sat framed by candles. 3 smiling faces frozen in time, remembered as the children who loved swimming, fishing, go-karts, and laughter. The defense prepared to argue that without the confession, the case lacked its sharpest edge. But the prosecutors remained steadfast. They would not falter. They would seek justice even without the chilling words on record. The trial loomed, its shadow stretching across Claremont County like a storm on the horizon. No one doubted Chad's guilt. The question now was what sentence the law would allow, and whether the family could survive the torment of the courtroom. And as the judge's ruling rippling through Ohio, one fact remained unshakable. 3 little boys were gone, ages 10, 7, and 3. Their voices silenced, their futures completely erased, wiped out. No ruling could undo that truth. Night dwellers, do you believe that the law should ever silence a confession? Even if it risks justice? Or should every word spoken by an unaliver be heard in court? Post your thought in the comments. Chapter 7, The Plea. Summer of 2024 brought sweltering heat to Ohio, but inside the Claremont County Courthouse, the air felt icy. The trial date loomed. Reporters were already preparing to broadcast every detail to the nation. For weeks, prosecutors had promised to pursue the death penalty, to bring the harshest punishment the law would allow. But in late July, whispers began. Talks between prosecution and defense, private meetings behind closed doors. Survivors Laura and Alexis were consulted, their wishes taken into account. The idea of a public trial, of being forced to relive every second in front of strangers, weighed heavily. And then on August the 2nd, 2024, Chad Dorman was escorted into the courtroom for what many assumed would be a routine hearing. Instead, the room buzzed as the judge announced a surprise. A plea deal. Chad stood, shackled, as his lawyer addressed the court. He would plead guilty to 3 counts of aggravated unaliving and 2 counts of felonious assault. In exchange, the state would drop the death penalty specification. Gasp filled the courtroom. Some in the gallery shook their heads, furious. Others wept quietly. Laura sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. The prosecutor spoke firmly, the voice carrying the weight of every mother, every father, every neighbor in that community. This plea assures that Chad Dorman will never see freedom again. He will die in prison. And most importantly, it spares the surviving family from enduring a trial that would only deepen their wounds. The judge turned to Chad. Do you understand these charges? Do you understand that by pleading guilty, you are waiving your right to a trial? Yes, Chad said simply. His voice carried no tremor, no hesitation. The gavel struck. The deal was accepted. Laura's eyes filled with tears. Later, she would tell reporters, no punishment will ever bring my boys back. But having a guarantee that he will spend the rest of his life behind bars, that is what is best for my family. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was mixed. Some community members demanded the death penalty, believing anything less was an injustice to those boys. Others nodded solemnly, understanding the unbearable weight that a trial would have placed on Laura and Alexis. That night, the courthouse steps became a sea of candlelight once again. The names of Clayton, Hunter, and Chase were spoken softly into the humid Ohio night air. Parents clutched their children a little tighter, kissed their foreheads, and whispered silent prayers. And Chad Dorman, shackled and silent, was returned to his cell, knowing his fate was sealed. Life behind bars, no parole, no second chances, no escape. But even with the plea, one truth remained inescapable. 3 small coffins had already been lowered into the ground, and no sentence could undo that. Question. If you were in Laura's place, faced with the choice between a public trial and a plea deal, would you demand the death penalty or accept life in prison to spare yourself more agony? Chapter 8. Life without light. The courtroom was packed on August the 2nd, 2024, the air heavy with anticipation. People had come not for suspense. The plea had already stripped the trial of uncertainty, but for closure, for the survivors, for the neighbors, for every person who had whispered those boys' names in prayer. This was the day that justice would be spoken aloud. Chad Dorman shuffled in, shackled at the wrists and ankles. His face was pale, unreadable, his eyes cast downward. The orange of his prison jumpsuit clashed against the polished wood of the courtroom benches. The judge's voice was grave as he recited the charges to which Chad had pleaded guilty. 3 counts of aggravated unaliving, 2 counts of felonious assault. One by one, the sentences were read. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Life again. Life once more. 3 lives taken. 3 consecutive life sentences. And then an additional minimum of 16 years stacked on top for the assaults. He will never leave prison, the prosecutor said flatly. He will die there. But the most haunting words came not from the bench or the prosecutor, but from Laura. She stood trembling but unbroken, her voice shaken as she addressed the court. No punishment will ever bring my boys back. But this gives me peace knowing he will never breathe free air again. Clayton, Hunter, Chase, my beautiful boys, remember them as they were. Remember their laughter, their smiles, their love of fishing, swimming, go-karts. Not what was done to them, but how they lived. Her words broke the gallery. Tears streamed down the faces of strangers, reporters, even hardened deputies. Then Alexis, the stepdaughter, spoke. She described the guilt she carried, the images burned into her memory, and the impossible contradiction of a man who had once been kind to her, turning into something monstrous. I will never forgive him, she said softly. But I can't hate him either. I don't know why. I just can't. The room sat in silence after her words, heavy with confusion and pain that defied logic and language. Finally, the judge delivered the official sentence. Chad Dorman, you will serve 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 16 years. You will die in prison. May God have mercy on your soul. The gavel fell. The sound echoed like thunder. Chad was led out of the courtroom, the chains clinking with every step. He showed no emotion, no regret, no sorrow, not one tear, only emptiness. But for Laura, for Alexis, for every neighbor who left flowers at the Dorman home, there was at least one certainty now. He would never return. The monster who had walked among them, who had torn apart his family, would spend the rest of its days staring at cold concrete walls, listening to the sound of locked doors closing behind him. And yet, even as the sentence sealed his fate, the wound remained. The laughter of 3 little boys would never again echo through Monroe Township. Their absence was the true life sentence for their mother, their sister, and their community. Question. If you had the chance to speak at Chad Dorman's sentencing, what would you say to him? Words of rage, words of grief, or would silence speak louder? Tonight, you have walked through one of the darkest true crime stories. You have seen the fragility of innocence, the weight of grief, and the resilience of those left behind. Laura and Alexis still have nightmares, screams, waking up in night terrors, Let the memory of Clayton, Hunter, and Chase remind us that evil can lurk in the most unlikeliest of places, but that love, remembrance, and truth carry forward. That is the true crime story for tonight. Let's take a 10-minute intermission. It is now 9:34. We will come back at 9:44. The wheel will spin again, and I will tell another story. Why don't we post a candle in the comments? I'll be right back. Had anyone heard that story? And I believe that it was Eat, Drink, and Be Rosie that submitted that one. It's just so sad. I just don't know. I don't know what possessed him. He just said it had to be done. That is like the most haunting thing. Right there. I'm just like, why? Why did you have to do that? I don't understand it. Hey Nana Sherry. Hey Kelly. Hey Peanut. Hey Jess. Hey Diana. Hey Pink. Hey Grandma. I mean, in a way, I can kind of understand her not wanting to go through that whole trial. Can you imagine? She just lost 3 children, her sons, not to mention that he tried to unalive her, and he would have unalived Alexis as well. He said he was going to do it to all of them. Yeah. Hey, Bonnie Lass. They do not survive long. I wouldn't be a bit surprised. I haven't checked up on it in a couple weeks, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised to hear that I think his life will be a lot shorter than he thinks. Hey, X. Cameo, yes. Hello, Brenda. Yeah, just very odd. Thank you, X. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What do you all want to hear next? What are you hoping that the will land on? Huh? If I'm missing anyone, it's hard to scroll up through all these comments. I see you, Spirit Junkie. Hello. Um, anything but possession. I think the last time you said that, X, I think it landed on possession, if memory serves me correctly. Stephen King, Palm says. Oh no! I didn't know that, Shirley. Let's send out healing thoughts and prayers to Eat, Drink, and Be Rosie. I hate that she wasn't here for that story. It's so funny that you should ask that, Theodosia. I am actually getting ready to work on some children's stories. I am. Just spooky short stories. So stay tuned for that. I am kind of working things in my mind. So funny that you actually asked that because I have actually had quite a few people to direct message me saying that they would love for the kids to be able to stay up and listen to the stories like on a Friday night or a Sunday night or something, but they don't want to get scared. So I'm actually working on something. It's coming. Exactly, Julie. Yeah, so they are, but I was just thinking, when I started thinking about dark fairy tales and everything like that, I'm like, oh, I could tell Cinderella, or I could do Thumbelina, or whatever. It wouldn't take very much to change it up, like removing the scary dolls and doing something else, but coming across as. I would definitely have to come up with a name differently than, I could still be the Night Queen, but I would be telling stories for children. So stay tuned. Yeah, just hang tight. And what is amazing is X, our wonderful X, she had already made that suggestion to me. I forget when it was. It might have been a couple of months ago, but I used to incorporate a raven into my videos back last year when I first started this, and his name was Edgar the Raven. And so she's like, wouldn't it be cool if a bunch of kids and Edgar the Raven went and explored different places? So I think that's getting ready to come to fruition. Exactly, Raybab. Exactly. All right. It is time. See, this wheel is so much better in this space because I actually have the room to do it now and everything. So it's just really fantastic. True crime. Kidding. I was just playing with it. Lady X is amazing. All of my wonderful night watchers are absolutely amazing. With that being said, are we ready to shake off the true crime and spin again? Let's see what we get. Big money. All right, here we go. Oh, short story. Oh my God. I have another story that has been on the will forever. And for those of you who may have came in late, tonight is a dark purple. Under the lighting, it actually looks kind of maroon, but it is actually, I mean, I guess it could. It's like a Merlot, I guess, probably. It's got this train off to the side, and then you have the actual gown. Isn't it pretty? And if y'all remember when I first started Twisted Tales Live, I thought that I resembled more of a fairy queen than I did a night queen. So it will not be hard to switch roles for children's stories. Not hard at all. All right. The shoes. I went back in there when I was taking the break, and I'm like, I have got to put some different shoes on. Yeah, the shoes are amazing, aren't they? The Night Queen and her scary bedroom shoes. And tonight's short story is The Riverton Manor Haunting, a true Illinois ghost story. Again, this is one that I had never heard of until I started watching a series called A Haunting, which has 11 seasons, and I absolutely love it. Just a little bit of a plug. I'm getting ready to start season 5. Anyway, this is a true haunting. Are you ready? Chapter 1, The Purchase. The Henderson family thought they'd found their dream home when they discovered the Victorian mansion on Elm Street in Riverton, Illinois. Built in 1887, the 3-story brick structure had been on the market for over 2 years. Hold on, the music is all wrong. There we are. Chapter 1, The Purchase. The Henderson family thought they'd found their dream home when they discovered the Victorian mansion on Elm Street in Riverton, Illinois. Built in 1887, the 3-story brick structure had been on the market for over 2 years. That's not a good sign. Its price dropping steadily until it fell within their modest budget. Sarah Henderson first walked through the ornate front door on a crisp October afternoon in 2019. The realtor, Miss Whitman, seemed unusually eager to close the deal quickly. So what happened? Why has it been on the market for so long? Well, the previous owners were relocated, she explained vaguely, her keys jingling nervously in the silence of the empty parlor. The house was magnificent despite its age. 12-foot ceilings, original hardwood floors, and elaborate crown molding throughout. A grand staircase curved upward from the foyer, its banister carved with intricate rose patterns. Sarah's husband, Tom, was immediately sold on the spacious workshop in the basement, while their twin daughters, Emma and Grace, both 15, were thrilled by the tower room that would serve as their shared study. What Miss Whitman didn't mention were those 3 previous families who had fled the property within months of moving in. She also failed to note that the house had been empty for nearly a decade before the recent string of short-term residents. The closing went smoothly, though Sarah noticed the previous owner's signature on the deed was shaky, as if someone had written it in great haste or distress. Chapter 2. First, signs. The Henderson family moved in on November the 1st, All Saints' Day. The first week passed peacefully as they unpacked and settled into their routines. Tom continued his engineering job in Springfield. Sarah worked from her new home office as a freelance graphic designer, and the twins adjusted to their new school. It was Emma who first noticed something amiss. On the second Tuesday in the house, she came downstairs for breakfast looking pale and tired. Mama, did someone come into your room last night while you were sleeping? She asked her mother, stirring her cereal silently, absently. Of course not, honey. Here, have a piece of toast. Why? I kept hearing footsteps in the hallway. Real slow, heavy footsteps stopped right at my door. And then the door opened. Okay, was it your sister? No, there was no one there. I thought maybe you or Dad had came in to check on me and left the door open like you used to do when I was little. Grace looked up from her phone. I heard it too, Mom. I thought it was Dad checking on us, but they being a big house and all. But Tom had been in the basement workshop until nearly midnight, and the master bedroom was on the opposite end of the hall from the girls' room. And this was a big house. When they asked him about it, he frowned. I didn't go near your bedroom, girls. Maybe it's the house settling. Dad, I don't think houses open doors on their own. Sarah rolled her eyes. It's just the old house. These old houses make noises. You know that. That night, though, Sarah lay awake listening. Just after 2 a.m., she heard them too. Deliberate, measured footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway. The hallway was long and dark. When she nudged Tom awake, the sound stopped immediately. Honey, Honey, do you hear that? Hear what? Listen. Creak. Stomp. Creak. Stomp. Tom, I think someone's in the house. Go check it. Tom grabbed his baseball bat from beside the bed. He walked slowly across the floor. Creak. Stomp. Tom whipped open the bedroom door and jumped out into the hallway with the bat, prepared to hit the intruder. But there was nothing there. Just shadows and moonlight. All through the night, though, Sarah didn't believe Tom. What do you think it was? Honey, I'm telling you, it's an old house. It's settling. That's all it's doing. Now please don't wake me up. I've got an important meeting in the morning. But Sarah continued to count the steps in her mind. 12 paces from the top of the stairs, down the hallway, to the girls' room. A pause. A stomp. And then 12 paces back. Chapter 3. The previous owner. This continued for the next 2 months. But then shadows began to appear. One night, Tom and Sarah were sitting in the living room watching TV late. It was a Saturday night. The girls had retired to their rooms. Tom always liked to watch the TV with all the lights off. Sarah usually didn't mind it, especially when they were in their small apartment. But now, well, she would prefer the lights to be on. As they sat there watching a scary movie, Sarah saw something behind them. She jumped. She looked over. Did you see that? See what, babe? Here, have some popcorn. Honey, did you see that? There was a shadow on the wall behind us. Watch the movie. But it began to be more and more frequently. The girls kept talking about steps, the creaking, the stomping, stopping at their bedroom door, sometimes opening the bedroom door. Curious about their home's history, Sarah visited the Riverton Historical Society the following Saturday. The elderly volunteer, Miss Caldwell, brightened when Sarah mentioned the Elm Street property. Oh, that house is darling, isn't it? The Blackwood house. One of the other ladies that was working there stood up from behind her desk, wondering what the excitement was about. What's going on, Nancy? You know the old Blackwood house? This family just bought it. Isn't it just darling? It looks like something out of a storybook for children. That's quite a local place of history, you know. Built by Judge Ezra Blackwood in 1887. He was, well, let's say, she doesn't know how to tell a story. I'll tell it. He was a harsh man, very strict with his family. Miss Caldwell pulled out a thick folder of newspaper clippings and photographs. The house looked identical to its current state, though the trees were smaller and there was a wrought iron fence that had since been removed. What more can you tell me about it? Sarah asked. Well, the judge lived there with his wife Margaret and their daughter Rose. until his death in 1923. And after that, well, Margaret became something of a recluse. He was very harsh, very stern. He kept a very tight thumb on his women. He called them his women. Neighbors said they rarely saw Margaret or Rose, though they'd sometimes hear piano music playing late at night. They said it was the most mournful sound. Sarah studied a former portrait of the Blackwood family. Formal. Judge Blackwood was a stern-looking man with deep-set eyes and a severe expression. His wife appeared frail and nervous beside him, while their daughter, perhaps 16 years old, stared directly at the camera with an unsettling intensity. Wasn't she beautiful? Even for a photo back in that time to reflect that kind of a beauty, she must have been stunning. What happened to them? Sarah asked. I mean, after the judge passed away. Miss Caldwell's expression grew uncomfortable. Well, poor Margaret died in 1945, and Rose, well, Rose never married. She lived alone in that big old house for nearly 60 years, until she passed in 2003. The house has changed hands several times since then. And of course, it's rumored to be haunted. But I think that gives houses a certain charm. Don't you? Changed hands? That was the one thing that Sarah caught up on. Well, yes, families don't seem to stay long. They say things about the atmosphere of the house, I suppose. You know, old houses can feel heavy. I suppose it's with all the years, the memories, the people that lived in their walls. Sarah left the Historical Society with photocopies of the articles, but Miss Caldwell's hesitation suggested there was more to the story than what appeared in print. Chapter 4, Rose's Room. A couple more months passed. The disturbances escalated during their third week in the house in the new year. The twins reported their bedroom door opening and closing now by itself during the night. One of them came downstairs the next morning for breakfast. Emma said, "Mama, I don't feel like going to school." "Why? What's wrong?" "Did you hear it?" The other twin spoke up. "Hear what?" "Mama, the door kept opening and closing and opening and closing all night long. We've had no sleep. I'm cranky, and I've got an exam." Okay. What do you mean by it was opening and closing? Maybe there's a draft. Mom, it would open and close, open and close, open and close, as if someone was playing a game with us. I finally got tired of getting out of bed and closing it again. It just started doing it on its own. And then other things began to happen. Tom found his tools rearranged in the basement workshop. They were on a wall. He put nails in them to hold them up. But when he went out to look, they were all laying on the floor. He did comment that at least the ghosts were organizing them neatly. Precise patterns that weren't how he'd left them. He was always the one to find humor in every situation. Sarah began experiencing the most unsettling phenomena, though. One Wednesday morning, she was working in her office in the house when she learned that had been Rose Blackwood's room. The way that she found that out was she had the wallpaper changed in the house. The wallpaper was old damask, old faded roses that probably once were a very brilliant pink, but now were more of a gray. When the wallpaper was removed, the painter told her to come and look. And he showed her these drawings. A girl looking sad, a tear rolling down one cheek. And underneath it said, "Help me. Help me." Sarah didn't want to cover it up, so she asked the painter if he could leave that spot alone. And underneath of it was the name Rose. As she would work on her computer, she would see movement in her peripheral vision. A shadow passing by the window, or the sense of someone standing just behind her shoulder. One afternoon, while editing a client's logo, her computer screen flickered. When it stabilized, her design software was open to a new document. Someone had typed a single word in elegant script font. And guess what it said? Leave. Sarah stared at the screen, her heart racing. She hadn't touched the keyboard. She quickly saved her work and closed the program, but the incident left her completely shaken. That evening at dinner, she mentioned the computer glitch to her family. And Tom said, "Maybe we have a virus." He was the practical one. But Grace looked thoughtful. "Mom, what did you say the name of the girl was that used to live here?" "Rose. Rose Blackwood. I think I've been dreaming about her. At least I think it's her." "What did you dream?" "It's a girl in a old-fashioned white nightgown, and she stands at the foot of my bed, and she's just watching me." And then Amma nodded slowly. "I've seen her too, Mom. I thought they were just nightmares. How long have you been seeing them?" "Maybe 2 nights. It's been longer for me," Grace said. "About a week." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't told the girls anything about Rose Blackwood beyond her name. Chapter 5. The Piano. So it started with doors, footsteps, creaking up and down the stairs, then shadows. And then the music started on a Thursday night in late November. The music room. Sarah wanted to do something special with that room because, well, it was beautiful. It had crown molding across the top of the 12-foot ceilings, and in the middle of the ceiling was a dome. It always made her feel light. She had already discussed with an interior designer decorating it and having it ready for the Christmas holiday. The music started on a Thursday night in that late November, though. Sarah woke to the sound of piano music drifting up from the first floor. A melancholy melody played with expert skill. She checked her phone. It was 2:47 a.m. She shook Tom awake. Do you hear that? Tom listened, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to alarm. Is that a piano? Yes, it's coming from downstairs. They crept to the top of the staircase. The music was clearly emanating from the front parlor, where the house's original piano still sat. The previous owners had left it behind, claiming that it was far too heavy and too difficult to move. Sarah had ran her hands over the piano once, maybe a couple more times. Every now and then she would go in the room. She mainly kept the doors closed because the room was so chilled. As they descended the stairs, the melody grew louder and more complex. Sarah recognized it as Chopin's Nocturne in E, flat major, played with the kind of technical proficiency that comes from years of experience, years of practice. They reached the parlor doorway and peered in. The piano bench was empty. The moonlight put the piano on spotlight with a beautiful blue glow. But the keys were moving, depressing by themselves as the invisible pianist continued the magnificent performance. In the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, Sarah could almost make out the outline of someone seated at the bench. A young woman in a flowing white gown. The music stopped abruptly when Tom stepped into the room. The sudden silence was deafening. "Hello?" Tom called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" The piano bench creaked, as if someone had just stood up. Then came the sound of footsteps, light, feminine steps moving across the hardwood floor toward the staircase. Sarah and Tom, in fear, pressed themselves against the wall as the invisible presence passed between them and began climbing the stairs. They could hear each step clearly, could feel the subtle vibration through the floorboards, but saw nothing. The footsteps paused on the landing, then continued down the hallway toward what had been Rose's room, Sarah's office. Chapter 6, Research and Revelation. Unable to sleep after the piano incident, Sarah spent the rest of the night researching the Blackwood family online. What she discovered chilled her more than any supernatural encounter. Judge Ezra Blackwood had indeed been a harsh man, but the historical records only hinted at the true nature of his cruelty. Sarah found references to him in several legal documents from the early 1900s, cases where he had handed down unusually severe sentences, particularly to young women accused of moral impropriety. More disturbing were the medical records she uncovered at the county clerk's office the next day. Rose Blackwood had been treated multiple times for nervous conditions and hysteria, common diagnoses used to explain away the symptoms of abuse in that era. The most revealing document was Rose's death certificate from 2003. The cause of death was listed as natural causes. But a note in the margin mentioned that when she was found lying unalived by her piano, that apparently she had died while playing the same piano that now sat in Sarah's front parlor. Sarah also discovered why families kept leaving the house. A brief article in the Riverton Gazette from 2018 mentioned that the previous residents had reported persistent disturbances and had abandoned the property in the middle of the night, leaving most of their belongings behind. But it was the final piece of information that made Sarah's blood run cold. According to the records, Rose Blackwood had died on November the 24th, exactly 1 month after the Henderson family had moved in. 2 families before they moved in. November the 24th arrived with an unseasonable warmth that felt oppressive rather than pleasant. The twins were spending the night at their friends' houses, a coincidence that Sarah now viewed as providential. She and Tom had decided not to leave the house. Despite everything, this was their home, their investment, their future. They would face whatever came. The encounters had picked up in intensity. Sarah walked in one morning to find all her cabinets in her kitchen open. And when Tom walked in and questioned what in the hell was going on, plates began to fly off the shelves, cups, glasses, and one cut him right across the forehead. The disturbances that night, though, began earlier than the usual night. At 9 p.m., the piano started playing. Not the gentle nocturnes of previous nights, but something dark and discordant. Books fell from shelves throughout the house. The temperature in Sarah's office dropped so dramatically that their breath became visible in the air. At 10:30, Sarah was in the kitchen making tea when she heard Tom call her name from upstairs. When she reached the second floor, she found him in their bedroom, asleep. Tom? She shook his shoulder gently. He woke confused. What's wrong? You called me. You just called me from the top of the stairs. Honey, I'm sorry. I fell asleep. I was tired. You called me. The voice that called out from the top of the stairs sounded exactly like you. And then the next morning, Tom was in the bathroom, shaving. Tom? Tom! He went to the top landing and hollered downstairs. Sarah? What's wrong? Tom? The voice kept calling Tom's name with increasing urgency. Tom? Tom went down the stairs slowly. Sarah? And then he looked outside the kitchen window above the sink. Sarah was at the far edge of the property, beating the birds. They stayed together after that, sitting in their bedroom with the lights on, waiting for dawn. They didn't even want Grace and Emma in the house anymore. At midnight, the house fell silent with an abruptness that was somehow more frightening than the chaos had been. And that night, as they lay in bed with the door open, they heard it. Creak. They heard the footsteps on the stairs. Not the measured pacing they'd grown accustomed to, but rapid, angry steps. The footsteps reached the hallway and stopped just outside their door. Tom and Sarah held each other tightly, waiting to see what was going to enter their room. Nothing. But then they heard it again, inside the bedroom. Tom grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her out of the bed as quickly as possible. They took off down the hallway. Sarah said that the temperature had dropped by about 30 degrees. They could feel the frost in the air, and it came pouring out of their mouths. They could sense a presence following them down the hallway, down the steps, malevolent and ancient, standing in the doorway. And then a figure took shape. A long, tall, black figure. Rose? Rose Blackwood, is that you? I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. This is my house. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and a voice, barely audible, whispered back. Not Rose. Chapter 8. The Truth. The next morning brought answers, but not comfort. Miss Caldwell from the Historical Society called Sarah, and her voice was shaking. Sarah had asked her to find out everything that she could about the judge and Margaret and Rose. I'm sorry, dear. I should have told you everything from the beginning. After you visited and you asked me to do some more research, I just couldn't stop thinking about your family in that house. Are your girls there? No, they've been staying with a friend of mine in town. Oh, thank goodness. The truth was darker than Sarah had imagined. Judge Blackwood hadn't just been strict. He had been violently abusive to both his wife and his daughter. Rose had been essentially imprisoned in her room for most of her adolescence, allowed out only for meals and piano practice. The judge used to pace that hallway at night, Miss Caldwell explained. Neighbors said they could hear him yelling. He was monitoring them, making sure that they didn't try to escape. I even found records of one neighbor that witnessed that Rose had escaped, and he caught her and pulled her by the hair all the way across the lawn back into the house. Rose Blackwood was never seen again. And I found something else out too. Margaret Blackwood did not die of an illness. It's now been recognized as the long-term effects of a repeated head trauma. Rose had lived in terror for 60 more years after that, too psychologically damaged to ever leave the house. That poor woman. So what are you saying? Rose isn't the one haunting your house, dear. It's him. I spoke to some of the previous families that lived there. They talked about a black shape, doors slamming and closing, things being thrown at them, objects. One of the boys fell down the stairs and broke his leg. They left in the middle of the night. So you're saying that it's Judge Blackwood? I'm pretty sure, yeah. I think Rose is trapped there with him just like she was in life. The presence that they had encountered wasn't the spirit of a lovely young woman. It was the spirit of her tormentor, still patrolling the hallways, still maintaining his twisted control over his domain. The footsteps you hear, the sense of being watched, from all other encounters that I've heard from those families, that's him. Rose only appears when she's trying to warn people. Sarah got cold chills from the top of her head to the soles of her feet. The piano playing, you saying the word leave on your computer, she's trying to protect you from him. Sarah thought of the gentle nocturnus, the careful way their belongings were rearranged rather than destroyed, the dreams the twins had described. Rose wasn't the threat. She was the guardian angel trying to save them from something far worse. So what do I do? Well, I took the liberty of contacting Father McKenna from Mary's Catholic Church, explaining the situation. I think you should call him. I think you need to have your house blessed. Chapter 9, The Battle. Armed with this knowledge, the Henderson family made a very difficult decision. They couldn't abandon Rose to face destiny, eternity alone with her abuser. But they also couldn't continue living in a house where a malevolent spirit held sway. Sarah contacted Father McKenna from St. Mary's Catholic Church, explaining the situation as best as she could. Before moving into the Blackwood mansion, she had no idea of the paranormal. She didn't believe in ghosts and things going bump in the night. But she did now. To her surprise, as she explained everything to Father McKenna, he didn't dismiss her claims. Sarah, I've heard stories about that house for years, he admitted. If what you're telling me is true, this isn't a simple haunting. This is a case of spiritual bondage, one soul holding another prisoner. The first thing that Father McKenna suggested was that Sarah buy sage, walk around with the Bible through every room in the house, and declare for the spirit of Blackwood to leave her home. She tried, but it just got worse. Father McKenna then decided that the blessing ceremony would take place. It happened on December the 1st. He arrived with holy water, blessed salt, and a determination Sarah found reassuring, as did Tom. But as soon as he began the ritual, the house began to fight back. Doors slammed throughout the mansion. The temperature plunged. Objects flew through the air with violent force, a book hitting Tom in the back of the head. The piano played a thunderous, rage-filled symphony that made their ears ring. In Sarah's office, books erupted from shelves, and her computer monitor exploded in a shower of sparks. But through it all, they could sense another presence, gentler, protective. Rose was there too. Come here. Come here. Come here. Citrine, I have a presence. She comes along at the worst moments. The battle reached its climax in the front parlor. Father McKenna was reciting prayers of banishment when the judge materialized, not fully visible, but present enough that they could see his outline, feel his rage pressing against them like a physical force. The piano bench lifted into the air and hurled itself toward the priest. Sarah screamed, but the bench stopped in mid-flight, hovering for a moment before setting gently on the ground. Rose had intervened. For a moment, two figures stood in the parlor, the dark, oppressive judge of Judge Blackwood, and the faint, luminous outline of a young woman in white. Then Rose turned to Sarah, and for the first time, her face was clearly visible. Beautiful, kind, and finally at peace. She smiled and nodded once, as if to say goodbye. But the other spirit was stubborn. I command you to go in the name of Jesus Christ. You are to leave here. Leave this family alone. You are commanded to leave here. Leave this family alone. No! Judge Blackwood screamed. And then Rose grabbed him by the arm. She smiled once again at Sarah, Tom, and the priest, and then pulled him up into the light. His shadow dissipating like smoke in the wind. His malevolent presence lifted from the house like a weight being removed from Sarah and Tom's chest. Sarah recalls. It was the craziest thing. We had had this heavy, oppressive force that had been hanging over us like a wet blanket for months. And then when Rose pulled her father up into the light, it was gone. It was just absolutely gone. There was so much freedom, and I could actually breathe. Rose lingered just a moment longer, her form growing brighter rather than dimmer. She raised one hand in farewell, and Sarah could swear she heard the faint sound of Chopin's Nocturne played in infinite gentleness. Then she too was gone. Chapter 10. The Henderson family spent Christmas in the house on Elm Street, and for the first time since moving in, it truly felt like home. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted completely. The strange cold spots had vanished. The house settled into the normal creaks and groans of an old building adjusting to the seasons. The twins no longer had nightmares. Tom's tools stayed exactly where he left them. Sarah's office became a place of productivity and creativity rather than unease. But then, three months later, something had not departed. As they sat in the living room, watching TV again, a shadow crossed their wall. Emma came halfway down the stairs. Her teeth were chattering. Mom? Emma, Mom, something's behind me. And to their horror, Emma rose in the air. A force slammed her body against the wall. Tom ran to the stairs and grabbed Emma by the ankles, pulling her down. But it was hard. It was hard with the strength of the force that was holding her up. Finally, he was able to grab her. They ran out of the house, and they never returned to the Blackwood mansion again. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's Wheel of Fate. I think it did quite well, don't you? I want you to have a relaxing weekend. I want you to go to bed and lie down and let the cares of the world just melt away for a little bit. My stories burrow deep. Where they cannot flee. And in the darkest corridors of your nightmares, you belong. To me. You do.